Maybe you've been in this situation where you're asking, why do I get so angry? And why can't I stop being angry? What is it with anger? And why is it show itself in such ugly ways and create such damage in my life? How do I understand it so that it doesn't control me and I don't become a slave to it? Today, I've got a special guest to join me in having the important conversation of understanding anger and getting underneath the anger so it doesn't control us anymore. Welcome to Celebrate Recovery Official, a podcast that shares life-changing stories, courage, hope, and leadership wisdom centered around the Celebrate Recovery principles based on the Beatitudes from Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus is helping us face our hurts, hang-ups, and habits and broken relationships as we surrender it to Him, our higher power, Jesus Christ, and walk in blessing and happiness the way He designed in spite of our circumstances and walk in that newness of life. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the Global Field Director of Celebrate Recovery, and welcome back. And thanks so much for sharing this podcast and helping us get the word out. It makes a big difference in helping us reach more people. We'd appreciate if you give us a review and a rating so that we can just have more exposure. That makes a huge, huge difference. I'm excited about today's topic, this topic of anger. And as I said in the opener, it can be a little bit misinterpreted, this topic of anger. And sometimes we can be afraid of it or even shame it. And it's so important, just right out of the gate, just want to say anger is not a bad thing. Anger is God-given emotion. It's actually a very accurate emotion that's a response to an injustice. So anger in itself, even Jesus was angry, right? When he's flipping tables, he doesn't like what's happening. But is what do we do with the anger? Because if we're not careful, anger can control us. So just want to have a conversation around anger. And I invited a sister in Christ. Sarah is one of our participants and also a great CR leader here in our Rogers Celebrate Recovery. And she's agreed to come on and have a conversation. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself the way you do in CR, and we'll jump into a conversation.
Yeah, I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and anger. My name's Sarah.
Hey, Sarah. Well, again, thanks for coming on. And so when we talk about anger, it's so important to have this conversation. We'll probably have more around this. But when you came into Celebrate Recovery, from my understanding, you didn't come in for anger. Right.
Right. I didn't think I was an angry person. I came in primarily, my counselor has suggested it, for mental health, panic attacks and depression. So yeah, I went to the A to Z group for a while and then, had an incident where I kind of had an anger explosion out in public and thought maybe I've got an anger issue. So I started going to the anger group.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I hate that it came to that, but it's good that you listened to that signal that said, oh, this feels not just like a signal, but it's kind of owning me a little bit. And so as you kind of, we have these issue pamphlets and we read through those. And I can remember doing the same thing, by the way. I don't have anger issues. And then I read it and went, oh, I think I struggle with anger. But what were some of those things as you were reading through that anger issue pamphlet, if you can recall, that really jumped out that go, oh, maybe that's a part of my story? Can you recall some of those things that were jumping out?
Yeah. Now I've been in the anger group about 6 years now. So now the checklist is ingrained in my mind. Yeah, things will happen and I'll think of a checklist item. But some of them were like becoming aggressive while playing a game for fun. And I remember thinking, people play games for fun? Like, you play games to win,
You're
right?
Supposed to win, yeah.
Yeah, and just another one was when you're confronted with a misinformed opinion, my voice becomes louder and more assertive.
Louder can make me more right.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, so someone comes at you with an opinion that differs from yours, and so the anger kind of comes on. You get louder, you get more animated. As you've been, it's 6 years, so as you've leaned into that anger, what's some things you've learned around it? I like that language of trying to understand the good reasons why that's there. Why did that show up? Why is that showing itself in animation and getting louder? What have you learned about yourself as you leaned into the anger to understand why that's present?
Yeah. So like I said, I never thought I was an angry person. I think having gone through CR and counseling, I realized it was probably about 25 years of just stuffing until it finally started exploding. You always talk about like big T, little T trauma. I had some big T trauma when I was little, and I just stuffed it until it just started coming out.
Yeah, and I think that's so good. I'm glad you brought up the word trauma, because trauma can be a little confusing, but I think at the heart of it, trauma, what makes trauma really deep is something happened, and that's a part of it, but even more so, someone that should have been there for me or could have been there for me as one of those people in my life didn't show up for me. That's kind of what makes it that much more. And so understanding the trauma of something someone has done, an injustice, and again, anger is a rise against an injustice, and someone was supposed to be there for me in that injustice and they weren't, it would make sense that we feel angry because maybe we were given, and I don't know if this is part of your story, but it just got me thinking about it. Sometimes we can write these narratives that, we take it to someone, I don't know if it happened that way, or maybe it didn't happen at all. So maybe there's a little bit of gaslighting and, feeling like, well, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this isn't as bad as I'm making it out to be. So we kind of walk away with shame. Is that any part of your story? Does that resonate in your life?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was also like a lack of voice. So
from yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I felt like what I've learned over the last few years in digging into the anger is, for example, somebody cuts me off in traffic, and the immediate thought I would have is the anger would happen, and then I would think that I don't matter. It was the I don't matter, or I don't have a voice, or I shouldn't be here. A lot of those thoughts, I think, that kind of developed from not having a voice, and then we talked about getting louder. Well, I just need to get louder. I need to be more aggressive, so people will hear me, because I didn't feel heard when I was little.
So using that example, I love that you brought that up. So you get cut off in traffic. Is it the response that you're feeling? I got angry and loud. Is it the effect of the response that's kind of taking you to those core beliefs, or were those kind of sitting underneath there? Does that make sense prior to the explosion or the outburst, or what came first there? Is it
right.
I had the outburst and now I'm feeling this, the chicken or the egg?
Right. Yeah, the outbursts would happen for years before I realized what was, what was really behind it. I remember I was even driving to a step study one time, and somebody cut me off, and I shouted so loud for so long. By the time I got to step study, my voice was hurting, and I was actually co-leading the step study with another anger sister. And so, I told her, hey, this happened on the way here. And it's after that's happened that I can kind of think through, but slowly through the process, it's a shortened amount of time. And, I'll have the thought now first before I have the reaction, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting, because when you were saying that, it kind of took me to the difference between responding and reacting. It feels like when you were kind of in an unhealthy space of using anger as a tool, you were in reaction mode rather than responding. So that taking a second is allowing you to respond, I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things in the problem solution statement. It says, give Jesus a nanosecond. And you wouldn't believe how hard that is. Because there are a lot of times where you don't even get the nanosecond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because, and we don't even realize this, but when we are wronged or cut off, I mean, sometimes we can, well, maybe it's not that big of a wrong, but it feels like a big offense, right? It's pain and fear in that offense. And in that, we don't realize it, but we have this longing in our heart for healing and justice. And I want justice now. A nanosecond can feel like, but if I give it a pause, I'm going to lose the opportunity to gain justice. There's a little bit of control in that, isn't there? Or is that a good word to use in that?
Yeah, I think that's all wrapped together with the anger and the, not feeling like I'm heard, a lot of lack of control. Yeah, the anger was the first emotion that would always come up for me before I realized there were other emotions other than anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was some control, trying to regain control in a situation that I don't have control.
Yeah, I love that. So things are out of control. I'm not being heard. I don't have a voice. And it's an interesting thought. I mean, just thinking about your story, Sarah, when a good thought just in our own healing process is when is the first time, when did I first come to believe that I don't have a voice? Somewhere along the way, I learned that. Right. And now it's playing itself out. As you look at your story, Sarah, what is that part of your story where you've gone through the inventory process, and Principle 4, for those that haven't been through Celebrate Recovery, it's just an inventory process of examining the pain points, that part of our story. But what parts of your story did you come to learn, as much as you feel comfortable sharing, but that you learned that this was the first time that you realized and came to believe that you don't have a voice or you don't matter?
Yeah, I think it was about 5 or 6. Just like I said, some trauma and people not being there for me, and just feeling like everyone else's needs were put ahead of mine, or their wants.
I'm not important enough.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's a hard place. Yeah. So you kind of had to get into, and sometimes we look at anger just to manage the behavior. And what you're talking about is heart change. It's almost like you're going back into that room with that little 5-year-old. And how do I respond to her differently and hold her in that space to kind of honor what she's going through, to be left alone? What was that like for you in that experience, to kind of go, kind of honor why she would feel angry? Because that's the little girl coming out of you, when you were doing those outbursts, that little girl that's hungry, throws her hands up and screams, "You will give me food, or you will change my diaper," whatever. You had an opportunity through that inventory process to kind of go back and honor her and what she's feeling, and maybe show up for her in a way no one had ever shown up for her. What was that like to show up for that part of yourself, Sarah, in that space, to give her a voice and almost be this other voice to say, "Hey, you didn't deserve that. I'm sorry. I care for you. You do matter. You do have a voice." What was that like for Sarah to kind of hold that other part of you that had been left alone?
I think it was a slow process. It definitely didn't happen with the first inventory. I think I've been through 6 now. And like I said, it's definitely better. I think I have more tools where I can, like self-affirmation, where I'll tell myself I do matter.
Yeah.
That's the big thing for me in CR, was realizing I mattered to God. Because a lot of my early, like inventory and working through, I think I had God on there thinking like, where were you? Do I matter to you? If I mattered to you, why, why would this happen? And so a lot of it, in the initial stages, was just realizing that I had a reason to be angry. It wasn't okay the way I was expressing it, but I think, realizing that it's okay that I can feel angry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. I love, one, that you gave permission that it could take some time sometimes, that sometimes we can we can kind of have a drive-through recovery approach. Just tell me what I got to do and I'll fix it. So I love that you gave permission that this could take time. You make a decision to lean into it and then trust the process with that. So as you kind of leaning into the anger, it makes sense why that little girl would be angry, because someone should have been there for her. Someone should have fought for her. Why wouldn't she be angry? So it's kind of honoring that what that little girl is feeling, and anger makes sense. But it's also, as we're honoring it, not getting stuck there. And what have you learned about what's underneath? You're doing a great job kind of painting a picture of the core beliefs that come with the thoughts. But what, if you're putting into words, if I'm looking at a bowl of gumbo and anger's in it, what's the emotions that little girl is really feeling that she just doesn't feel safe to say? What some of the things you learned about what underneath the anger?
Yeah, it was sadness. I think.
Just a lot.
Yeah, just a lot. I didn't allow myself to be sad because that was always seen as weakness, whereas anger was like more of powerful. I felt like I was doing something about it. It seemed like sadness was not really allowed.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. And this is such a great conversation. I know our listeners are getting a lot out of this. I am. So yeah, just that somewhere along the way, that was the bigger narrative. You didn't have permission to show big emotions. You certainly didn't have permission to talk about the sadness. And some of that's overt communication. Don't, quit your crying kind of thing. And some of it's covert. I want to take a quick break if we could, and when we come back, I want to talk about some of those covert communications that told you it's not okay to be sad, and why that would make sense, why anger would show up and fight for that part of you that needs to show sadness. So talking with Sarah about anger. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Stick with us. Hey friends, if you're looking for an online meeting or another meeting in addition to your in-person meeting, we encourage you to join us online with our open share meeting every Wednesday at noon Pacific time. If you'd like to join us, just go to celebraterecovery.com, find a link there and join us. We do a quick Devo and break up into gender-specific groups. We would love to have you join us this week every Wednesday, noon, 12 p.m. Pacific time every single week. Go to celebraterecovery.com for more information. Welcome back. Talking with Sarah. Right before break, Sarah, we were talking about just the covert and overt communication when you said I wasn't allowed to be sad. And this is good to kind of lean in. Those messages that you heard that weren't directly stated out loud, what were some of the things that communicated to you that it was not okay to be sad? For example, if I cried, and this is part of my story with my mom, if I cried and was sad, I would see a reaction in my mother that would kind of spin her out. And so covertly, I learned, sadness is bad. If I got angry, I got reprimanded and in trouble, and I didn't want to get in trouble, so just stuff my anger. What does that look like covertly or overtly in Sarah's life as you're growing up and learning these new systems?
Yeah, I think anger was always a big, it was always a big thing in our house. I'm trying to think about any other emotions I remember seeing. I don't remember seeing anyone in my house be sad, talk about feelings. Anger was always, it was okay to be angry. It was almost like you were expected to be angry at things.
Yeah.
I think
kind of celebrated then.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So maybe anger was accepted, but if you did cry, right, I'm trying to get real clear on where you learned it's not okay to be sad, right? What were you seeing around you on sadness? What would you hear or see that would give you that indication?
Yeah, just as a family, it felt like we were always supposed to be okay.
Be happy.
Right, just be happy. if I was sad, I'm trying to even remember, you know, being allowed to be sad, what would happen.
Even remembering seeing mom or dad cry.
Yeah, I have no memories of that.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, we were, even with each other, we were supposed to be okay. Like, it wasn't okay to even tell each other we weren't okay.
Wow. So doesn't that make sense? And you're being so vulnerable with us. It makes sense why Sarah would grow into a woman and buy into the narrative of a reality in by all rights and to yourself that sadness is not acceptable. And that's the thing, you know, sometimes even with depression, you know, we think, well, the opposite of depression is happy. No, the opposite of depression is just to feel. And so, you know, it's really expression. And so to not be able to have permission to be sad is to say, don't be human, Sarah. So guess who shows up? The big brother, and says, oh, yeah, well, I'll show you emotion. And anger shows up, and it's kind of used as a weapon.
Right.
It became a survival instinct, I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah, and just a lot of when I think back about, you know, learning to drive or driving with my dad, I feel like I see myself doing the things that I saw him doing. And that was one of the things that led me to the anger group, was just realizing, like, I don't want to be like that. You know, I don't have to shout at everybody that cuts me off, you know.
Yeah. There is a different way that I can do this.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And that's so important too. That is part of our story. And again, we're not justifying and making excuses, but we're trying to understand why we are and why we do what we do. You were mimicking what was modeled, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and even to this day, I remember I had been through this was probably a year ago. So I had been through the anger group for, 5 years. Felt like I was in a really good place. I was driving, I was in the car with my dad, and, you know, we're in a parking lot, somebody cuts us off, and he starts shouting, honk at them, you know, and I'm thinking, like, I have all my tools, and then
and just thrown out the window.
Right. And I'm thinking, oh, you know, it's just things you learn from those around you, and they're not in recovery, and they don't know better. And yeah, we slip right back into those old ways. Yeah. Right. It's interesting just imagining, just seeing you and your dad on the dance floor, right? And standing on the balcony looking down going, oh, I see why you're dancing this way. Right. It's like, it's part of you is like, wait, what? I've got tools. What's happening? Why am I responding this way? Oh, should I yell? Should I honk? Right. That's a little confusing when we kind of we bump against our old family system. And I love that, you know, this really takes practice, doesn't it? It's a process of practicing, honoring anger when it comes forward. If someone walks up and punches me in the face, of course I'm going to feel hurt and, you know, pain. I can't discount that, but what am I going to do with that to respond and not react? And you're working a new muscle. So you mentioned the nanosecond. What's some other things that Sarah has done to kind of proactively and even reactively in the moment to handle and struggle well with anger? Yeah, so one of the things I've worked through with my counselor is like an appropriate level of response, like 1 to 10. So before I would go from 0 to 10 in a nanosecond. And now it's learning, you know, if the response only deserves like a 2, but I go to a 10, you know, thinking through what's behind this, maybe what has happened the last couple of days that I haven't dealt with. But yeah, like you mentioned earlier, Jesus tipping the tables, and I think I've used that to justify some of my anger before. Jesus did it. right. Like Jesus tipped the tables, and I have to remember, like, he was doing it in response to, you know, the temple was being right, you know, and so the sanctity of the temple. And I told someone, well, what about the sanctity of the passing lane? Like, these people are defiling the passing lane. And so it's keeping it in perspective. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So in the process, and you've been through this process and going through the inventory,
How much has this the space for you as you look at your family system and kind of honoring your family? Because sometimes it can feel like we're being dishonoring if we're being honest about our family system. How have you been able to embrace the principle of being honest is being honoring? It's not dishonoring. How's that land for your heart as you walk through this?
Yeah. Well, now I've learned it's okay to be sad. So I feel like when I see those things crop up in my family, anger or dysfunction, the more healthy I get, the sadder it makes me for them. Just wishing they could experience recovery and.
I love that. Yeah, and it makes me remember in the Beatitudes in Principle 3, we're getting into Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn," and there's just a mourning after our sin. And sometimes it's mourning and holding our story of our family system and mourning after this is all my family has known. Doesn't mean that it makes it right, but it makes sense. And so mourning after that, and it's moved you to a place of empathy and compassion for them, choosing a different route, but mourning after them, it's grown your empathy for them. Is what I'm hearing. Is that you saying that right? Yeah. And the cool thing is Jesus brings comfort in that when we mourn after that. Yeah. So Sarah, somebody's listening right now and maybe they just got done. Maybe they're listening in their car and literally minutes ago, they just tried to protect the sanctity of the lane, right? And they had the anger outburst and they're not feeling real good about themselves, right? Yeah. After the fact, it's like, oh, I did it again. What would you say to bring encouragement to someone? Maybe they're in the recovery process and they're starting to learn about this anger struggle. And again, it's using it as a tool. It's honoring emotion of anger, but not using it as a tool. James 1:19-20 says we can't use anger as a tool for righteousness. We can't accomplish righteousness with our anger, but understanding what anger is and not using it as a tool. What would be some encouragement that you would give to somebody that is kind of in the middle of that, or they're in the early stages and it feels hopeless that they can't get this anger? The anger is still control. They're still a slave to the uncontrollable use of it, anger as a tool. What would you say to bring them encouragement if they're sitting across the table from you?
Yeah, I would just say, like we talked about before, it's a slow process. I think I realized it's not something that I learned overnight. It's something that is almost hardwired into me from growing up. And so it's just giving myself grace, or giving yourself grace to realize you're going to slip. You're going to shout at people.
Yeah.
You're going to explode at people at work. Snarky emails, just stuffing it. It's a whole lot of, it's not just explosion. It's a lot of other things, but just, I would just say give yourself grace and realize that you're almost having to rewire the way you function. And yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Give yourself grace. And in relationships, we're going to miss each other. We're going to hurt each other. We're going to blow it. But can I repair it and just own it and say, yeah, that came out wrong. Give myself grace, ask for forgiveness. But I love too, just the inventory process is helping us to get to the damage and effect of the things that have happened, so that we can ultimately change our choices in this space. So jump into that Celebrate Recovery process so we can experience that healing. But, well, Sarah, thanks for making some time. A great conversation. I know our listeners were blessed by it, and I appreciate your heart and being willing to come on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if anybody thinks they have anger and wants to check out our group, I remember the first night I came, they told me we're the friendliest bunch of angry people you'll ever meet. So
yeah, that's good. It's like, I'm going to go in there and everybody's going to be throwing things, yelling.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not what's going to happen.
Right.
It's the friendliest anger group I've ever been a part of. I love that. Well, thanks, sis. Appreciate you. Yeah, great to have a conversation with you.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I hope this has been a benefit for you. I love the conversation with Sarah. I just love her heart and just knowing her story. God has helped make sense of why the anger is there, and it helped her to understand the ways to get underneath that anger so it doesn't control her and become a slave to that and put her in some bad spaces. And God can do the same thing for you. And I want to encourage you, if you're struggling with this, don't be afraid to lean into that part of your story and to understand the good reasons why that might be there so that you can walk in that newness of life. Hey, if you'd like to join a Celebrate Recovery near you, go to celebraterecovery.com, find a group near you. Thanks for being with me today. I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, God bless.